the Panasonic G9, Panasonic flagship stills camera. So we're gonna be doing some tests here in Nashville. We're in one of my favorite places to eat. It's called Pinewood Social. It's a really cool place. But we're gonna be testing this camera primarily with the stills. It does have some really cool video features like 4K up to 60 frames per second, but this really is more of a stills camera, and that's what we're gonna be testing today. That's cool. So we're downtown Nashville right now on the walking bridge going into the city. We're going to be doing some tests with the Panasonic G9. Now, first impression so far, just straight out of the box, this camera fits my hand like a glove. It has a huge, deep grip here that I really love. All the buttons and the placement of them is just totally intuitive. The only thing that's a little odd is the nipple or the joystick on the back here. It's a little bit of a reach for even for my large thumb to reach over there. The record button is also in kind of an awkward spot, but because this camera is primarily a stills camera, it makes sense why they would put it there. When you switch over to video mode, however, you are able to trigger the record using the shutter button, so the awkwardness of this button goes away when you're in that mode. Now, as far as specs, this camera does have the exact same sensor as the GH5. The only difference is you're losing a lot of those big headline video features, like the anamorphic mode, the 10-bit recording, but you gain some huge things when it comes to stills and even for video. One being the EVF. The GH5 has a 0.75x magnification on the EVF. This one has a 0.83x, which is ginormous. I love how big the magnification is on this camera, and it makes it just a joy to use. That combined with the handling and just the feel of this camera when you're using it, it just feels like how it's supposed to be. This camera packs quite a punch when it comes to the frame per second that you can trigger off of this thing. You can actually pull 60 frames per second. That's right, 60 when you're in the electronic shutter mode. And because the processor is so good, you don't get a ton of rolling shutter like you used to on older mirrorless cameras. If you want to stick to the mechanical shutter, you max out at 12 frames per second. So to put that in perspective, the 1DX Mark II shoots 14 frames per second in the mechanical shutter mode and 16 in the electronic shutter mode. Pretty impressive for an under $2,000 camera competing with a $5,000 camera. Cool, I'm gonna just talk to the camera. You guys just do your thing back there, and then I'll take some pictures. So the burst rates with stills on this camera is insane, with up to 60 frames per second in the electronic shutter mode. But another cool feature on this camera is the 6K photo mode, which is just pulling JPEGs from essentially a video image. It's really intuitive to use, and it really helps in moments when you're trying to get something that's fast moving and fast action. You can max out at 60 frames per second in 8 megapixels, which is 4K, and 30 frames per second in the 6K mode, which is 18 megapixels. As I'm using this right now with these guys taking pictures, I'm switching between the 6K photo mode, the electronic high-speed burst rate, and then the mechanical burst rate, and I'm finding that the 12 frames per second in just the standard burst speed is more than enough. Most cameras can't even do that, and so I'm really getting enough, and it's writing to the card faster. When I use the electronic shutter and I'm writing raw images at 60 frames per second, it's taking a long time to write those files to the card. Granted, I am using a UHS-1 card in here. I don't own a UHS-2 card. Both of these card slots accept UHS-2, so I'd imagine if you have a faster card, that the write speed would be a lot faster. So how's the ISO performance on this camera? Well, it's Micro Four Thirds, so it's not going to be anything to write home about. We're going to run off some of the different ISO levels now as I talk about it, but it does max out at 25,600, and it's completely unusable at that level. I personally probably wouldn't go above 3,200. 6,400 is pushing it. So it's not terrible, but it's also not the best. So even though this camera is primarily a stills camera, it does have some great 4K recording options. The autofocus performance has not gotten any better necessarily. Some people are saying that it is faster than the GH5. It does seem to be tracking my face well. Right now I'm in the selfie mode. I'm looking at the image on the side of the screen, and I can see the box around my face. So this camera could be good for vloggers because you have a mic input, you've got the in-body image stabilization, so I'm able to walk around handheld and it looks really nice. So is it good as Canon's dual pixel autofocus or Sony's phase detect? Not at all, but it is okay and it works. Honestly, I typically use the manual focus mode when I'm in video on this camera, and there's a quick AF button that you can push and it just snaps in really quick and then it locks there. So that's usually the best option because then it's not fiddling back and forth. I'm curious to know how this looks and how this sounds. This is just the built-in mic on this camera. It probably doesn't sound very good. You really need to use an external mic on this camera for video. You don't get the log options that you get with the GH5 and the GH5S with Vlog. You do get the D Cine-like and the V Cine-like picture profiles, which are okay. Honestly, if you're using this camera for video, then I would recommend either the standard or the natural picture profiles. They look the best. In conclusion, this camera is exactly what Panasonic is marketing it as. It's their stills flagship camera. It has really fast burst rate. It's a joy to hold in your hand and use. It's got a great size. The battery life is fabulous. You've got the dual card slot. The button placement is great. The feel of it's great. Overall, this camera just fits perfectly in your hand. And if you're primarily a still shooter and you like the Micro Four Thirds system, then this really is your best option. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm Dave Altizer. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon so that you're notified every time we post a video. Let us know what you think in the comment section below. We'll see you guys next time.